What happens when a luxury store clerk mocks a quiet man for looking too poor to afford an expensive watch, not realizing that he's talking to Keanu Reeves? What starts as an arrogant moment turns into a lesson that not only the entire store but millions of people online would never forget. You see, when Keanu walks into a high-end store dressed in jeans and a backpack, he's not looking for attention. He's searching for something far more meaningful. By the end of this story, you'll realize that true class has nothing to do with wealth. It's all about character. But before we dive deeper, tell us where you're watching from. We love hearing from you and seeing how far these stories spread. The luxury watch store was an oasis of silence and sophistication, with dark wood walls, soft lighting, and shiny display cases exuding an air of exclusivity. Each watch gleamed as if it knew its worth, expecting you to recognize it too. Marina stood behind the counter, dressed in a beige blazer, her hair tied up neatly in a tight bun. She was scrolling through inventory on her tablet when the gentle chime of the door signaled the arrival of a new customer. She looked up and couldn't help but let out a silent eye roll. The man entering wore worn jeans, a plain black t-shirt, a motorcycle helmet in one hand, and a backpack slung over his shoulder. He stepped inside slowly, calm and observant, his long, slightly wavy hair falling past his shoulders. A scruffy beard gave him the look of someone who had experienced a lot, but needed to prove nothing. Marina studied him like a glitch in a program. "Good afternoon," she said, forcing a professional smile. "Can I help you with something?" "Good afternoon," the man replied, his voice calm and warm. "I'm just browsing for now." She nodded but kept her gaze fixed on him. The man approached one of the display cases and paused in front of a limited edition Swiss timepiece, a skeleton dial with a leather strap and white gold accents, one of the store's most expensive models. Marina raised an eyebrow. "That's a limited model," she said casually. "Anniversary collection. Very exclusive." He smiled faintly, his eyes still locked on the watch. "It's beautiful," he said. "I like it. Seeing how the mechanisms work together feels alive," he remarked, his eyes still fixed on the watch. She crossed her arms lightly. "Yes, well, these are highly technical pieces, and of course, very expensive." The subtext was as transparent as glass, but the man didn't react. He simply continued admiring the watch with quiet fascination. "Would you like to know the price?" Marina asked, her tone laced with polite disbelief. "Just curious," he replied, not even glancing at her. Marina let out a soft chuckle, the kind people use when they think they're above someone. He didn't belong here, and she wanted to make sure he knew it. Behind the counter, Marina's colleague Julia watched the exchange, barely concealing her amusement. They exchanged a silent glance, a look that spoke volumes between people who believed they had control of the situation. The man moved on to another case. His eyes landed on a deep blue dial watch with hand-carved Roman numerals. "This one's automatic, right?" he asked, now turning to Marina directly. She hesitated for a moment. It was a precise, technical question. "Yes. Caliber 3135 Swiss movement. One of the most reliable." "What's the power reserve?" he asked. She paused again. "Around 48 hours. Why do you ask?" "Because the rotor sound bidirectional, but I notice the hum is slightly off." Julia frowned, and Marina's throat tightened. "Do you know watches?" she asked, now slightly unsettled. "A little," he said with a smile. "I like learning." The way he spoke made her uncomfortable. His appearance screamed out of place, but his knowledge didn't match. It challenged her assumptions. "Do you work in the industry?" she asked, testing him. "Not exactly." "Are you a collector?" He shrugged. "Sometimes. But today, I'm not buying for myself." That sentence lingered in the air for a moment. Marina stepped forward, trying to reclaim control. "Well, if you're looking for a gift, we do have simpler models. Elegant, good value, more accessible." He looked at her. His eyes were calm, almost sad, but there was something steady behind them, like he saw more than he let on. "You don't think I can afford this one?" he asked softly, serenely. The question struck deeper than if he'd raised his voice. Marina paused. Her face flushed slightly, but she didn't drop the mask. "Don't take it personally," she said, smiling with her lips, not her eyes. "It's just, this kind of piece isn't for everyone." He was silent for a moment, then smiled, quiet, Knowing. Interesting, he said simply. The silence in the store thickened. Julia shifted uncomfortably behind the counter. A well-dressed couple entered the store, paused, sensing the tension, and turned around. Marina stood tall, still believing she had the upper hand, still thinking she was dealing with someone ordinary, someone who would soon walk away quietly. Little did she know, this anyone was about to teach her one of the most valuable lessons of her life. With a sarcastic smile, Marina asked, "Are you sure you walked into the right store? These watches aren't for just anyone." What Marina didn't know was that this anyone was about to teach her one of the most valuable lessons of her life. She returned to her position behind the counter, her heels clicking sharply on the polished floor. The moment her back was turned, her smile vanished. "Did you see that?" she whispered to Julia. The guy, dissecting movement calipers like he owns a factory, with a backpack and a helmet. Julia smirked. Maybe he watched a YouTube video and thinks he's a watchmaker now. They both chuckled softly, not with cruelty, but with that quiet kind of mockery that only happens when someone is certain of their superiority. Meanwhile, the man, still browsing and completely unbothered, moved to another display. This one showcased collector's pieces, rare, often made to order, each worth more than a small car. He paused in front of a sleek, dark chronograph with moon phase complications and a deep sapphire dial. Marina stepped closer again, still trying to maintain an air of professionalism. "That one's not for sale," she said, her tone cold and dismissive. "It's on hold for a client." The man nodded. "Shame. It's a beautiful piece." He didn't challenge her, didn't raise his voice, didn't even seem disappointed. And that made it worse. He simply continued walking along the displays, hand behind his back as if in a gallery. His posture was relaxed, but attentive, something about the way he carried himself threw Marina off balance. He didn't fidget. He didn't seem intimidated. He was just present, too calm. "Is there a particular brand you're interested in?" she asked, her voice sharp, trying to reassert control. "I'm looking for a gift," he replied. "Something special, something timeless." "And what's your budget?" she asked bluntly, letting the weight of the question linger in the air. He turned to her with a gentle smile. "Let's just say I'm not worried about that part." Before she could respond, another customer entered the store, a man in a tailored suit with a heavy watch already on his wrist. Marina immediately switched gears. "Good afternoon, Mr. Hargrove," she said, her tone glowing. "We just received the new models I told you about." She left Keanu standing alone and crossed the floor to greet the suited man like royalty. For the next few minutes, she fawned over him, offering espresso and opening display cases with gloved hands, her demeanor perfectly polished. From across the room, the man in the black shirt waited patiently. When Marina finally returned to him, her smile had shifted to routine boredom. "Still browsing?" she asked. He nodded. "Actually, I'd like to see that one again," he said, pointing to the first Swiss model he'd admired. Marina hesitated, glancing down at his boots, dusty from the road. "Are you serious about this piece?" "Yes," he replied. She exchanged a look with Julia before unlocking the case and pulling the watch out slowly, as if she expected him to drop it. She placed it on the tray in front of him. He picked it up with reverence, the way some people handle old books on newborns. His thumb traced the crown, the sapphire crystal, before examining the back, nodding slowly. "It's a gift?" Marina asked, unable to hide the doubt in her voice. "Yes," he said, "for someone special." He looked up, his eyes warm. There was something in his gaze that stirred something in her, but she couldn't quite place it. Still, she smirked, trying to maintain control. "Well, I hope they appreciate it. This piece costs more than your old motorcycle," she said, loud enough for others to hear. Julia chuckled from behind the counter. Mr. Hargrove glanced over briefly, amused, but the man didn't flinch. He simply smiled, a small, patient smile that unsettled Marina far more than any outburst would have. "You may be right," he said softly, "but then again, maybe not." With that, he turned his attention back to the watch, leaving Marina frozen in her smugness. It was then that a strange silence crept over the store. Julia stopped tapping on her screen, and Mr. Hargrove turned slightly toward the man, as if sensing something had shifted. No one knew what was coming next, but the change had begun. Marina, still believing she had the upper hand, repeated, "That watch costs more than your old motorcycle," her voice louder this time for everyone to hear. Keanu just smiled, but what he did next would leave the entire store speechless. For a few seconds, the store felt as though it were holding its breath. The man with the backpack and long hair placed the watch back on the tray, delicately, with respect. He looked at Marina, not with anger, not even disappointment, just quiet understanding. "Calm. Could I see the movement again?" he asked, his voice steady but firm. Marina blinked, caught off guard. "Excuse me." "The case back," he clarified. "It's see-through, isn't it? I'd like to get a better look at the movement." Something about his quiet yet insistent tone made her follow his request before thinking it through. She picked up the watch and gently flipped it, holding it closer to him. He leaned in slightly, his attention unwavering. "That rotary engraving, is it hand-done or laser-etched?" he asked, his voice carrying a hint of curiosity. She hesitated. "Laser." "Shame," he murmured. The older models had hand engraving. Less perfect, but more human. There was a note of nostalgia in his voice, as if he had actually held one of those older pieces before. Maybe he had. Marina didn't know how to respond. Her usual rhythm, the dance of control she'd mastered so well, was faltering. He continued, not mocking, not showing off, just speaking. "This crown here, triple-sealed system." She nodded slowly, following along. "And the power reserve is 48 hours, but you can push it to 50 if it's fully wound." "Right." "Yes," she replied quietly. "Impressive," he said, then paused, looking at the watch again. "It's a beautiful machine." Then, as his gaze met hers again, his voice softened. "And beautiful machines deserve to be treated with respect, don't you think?" Marina felt a lump form in her throat. It wasn't the question, it was the way he asked it. Not to challenge her, but to remind her. He placed the watch back down on the tray and took a slow breath. "I'd like to purchase it." The words hit her like thunder in the still room. Marina blinked in confusion. "What?" she asked, stunned. "I said," he repeated, his tone patient but unwavering, "I'd like to purchase it." He pulled a slim, black wallet from his back pocket. No flourish, no flash of cards, just quiet confidence. No financing. Marina hesitated for a moment, then, without a word, walked toward the register. Julia watched from behind the counter, her earlier smirk wiped away in stunned silence. "Do you need it gift-wrapped?" Marina asked flatly. "Yes, but not for me," he replied. She paused, the question on the tip of her tongue, but he seemed to close the door with just his tone. She didn't push further. "Is it a birthday?" she asked anyway, almost absent-mindedly as she began to wrap the box in silver paper, tying it with a dark blue ribbon. He gave a small smile. "Not exactly." He didn't elaborate further, and something in the way he said it made Marina stop asking. While Marina worked on the wrapping, the man stood quietly, his hands folded in front of him, his eyes resting on one of the nearby displays. He didn't check his phone, didn't pace. He simply waited. When the box was ready, Marina slid it across the counter. He reached for it but then stopped, as if something important had just occurred to him. "Actually," he said, "I should tell you why I chose this one." Marina looked up, bracing herself for something strange, but what came next was something she never expected. "It's for a boy I met during filming," he began, his voice soft. "A young fan, diagnosed with a rare condition. He had one wish, to visit a movie set." Marina froze. The color slowly drained from her face. "He didn't want photos or autographs," he continued. "He just wanted to talk about stories, about heroes, about time. We had lunch in my trailer. He asked if I ever felt afraid of time slipping away." He paused, looking distant. "I think about that a lot now." Marina didn't move. She was silent, holding her breath as he continued. "I told him time is a gift," he said softly, "and he told me that if he ever got better, he'd save up and buy a real watch, a beautiful one, a grown-up one." The man ran his hand gently over the wrap box in front of him. He didn't get that chance, he added quietly. The words hung in the air like a heavy fog. The silence stretched. So I'm buying it for him anyway, he said finally, his voice steady. I'll leave it with his parents, and a note. Another brief pause, a slight tremor in his voice. Because time still matters, even when someone's gone. Marina's throat tightened as the weight of his words sank in. Julia blinked rapidly, clearly moved by the moment. The entire store fell into a profound silence. Then, without warning, he did something that left everyone stunned. He placed the box gently back on the counter, stepped back, and spoke again. You know, he said softly, maybe this isn't the right place to buy it after all. Marina's eyes widened in shock. What? He looked around at the store, unfazed. I came here to find a gift, but instead, I was studied, judged, talked down to. He wasn't angry, just stating facts. So maybe this what shouldn't come from here. Marina opened her mouth, but no words came out. She stood frozen, her mind racing, unable to process what was happening. He picked up the box slowly, turned, and began walking toward the door. Half the store seemed to lean forward, as if holding a collective breath. The tension in the room was palpable. And then, as the door opened, a voice rang out. Keanu. Everyone turned. A man in a tailored Navy suit stood at the entrance, his face lit with disbelief. KeanuReeves, he said, his voice full of awe. My God, I didn't know you were in town. Keanu smiled warmly, his presence calm and unassuming. Hey, Matt, good to see you. The suited man rushed forward, shaking his hand. You still ride that Triumph? You haven't aged a day. The silence in the store turned electric. Marina's mouth went dry. Julia's hand trembled on the tablet. Matt turned to the others in the store, laughing. This guy, he said, is the most generous human I've ever met. Total legend. Keanu gave a modest nod, his demeanor humble. Marina stood frozen, staring at him as if seeing him for the first time, because in that moment, she was. Every assumption she had made about him unraveled in an instant. As Matt shook Keanu's hand, the store fell into a deep silence. Marina, pale and speechless, stood at the center of it all, the color draining from her face. The manager, who had been observing from a distance, finally stepped forward, his face drained of color, realization dawning on him. He had just understood who they had been speaking to. The manager had been distracted behind a mirrored wall, absorbed in stock reports on his tablet. But now, as he saw Keanu standing there, the full weight of the situation hit him. And so, the lesson that everyone in the store would remember unfolded. True class, kindness, and generosity couldn't be measured by appearances or assumptions. And the quiet man with the backpack had just proved that in the most unforgettable way. The moment the manager heard the name Keanu, something clicked. He stepped out from the back, stiff and pale, adjusting his tie as if trying to compose himself. His shoes tapped quickly across the polished floor, each step making his nervousness more apparent. Mr. Reeves, he said, breathless. I didn't realize you were here. Please forgive the delay. Keanu turned, calm as ever. No problem, he said simply, but there was weight in those two words. The kind of weight that had the power to silence an entire room. Marina, still holding the gift receipt, took a step back. Her fingers had gone cold. Matt, the suited man who had greeted Keanu with such familiarity, looked at Marina, then back at Keanu, as if trying to process what he had just heard. They didn't know who you were. Matt asked, half laughing, half shocked. Keanu shrugged. Wasn't relevant. The manager shot Marina a sharp look, one that said, asterisk fixes now. Asterisk. She opened her mouth to say something, but no words came out. The tension in the air was thick. Is everything all right? So, the manager asked, voice slightly strained. We'd be honored to complete your purchase with a discount, of course. Keanu glanced down at the gift wrap box still in his hand. I wasn't planning on asking for favors, he said, his tone not angry, but sharp and cutting. The words hit like a blade. The atmosphere in the store shifted instantly. Customers who had looked at Keanu with disdain now stared at him in stunned silence. Some adjusted their posture, Others froze, replaying the last few minutes in their minds, suddenly embarrassed for themselves. Matt, however, chuckled under his breath. He turned to the room, a smile tugging at his lips. "You all don't know what kind of man this is," he said, still laughing. "This guy once gave up his hotel suite just so the crew could rest properly after a 16-hour shoot. And the stories are endless." Julia's expression twisted slightly. Panic bloomed in her eyes as she looked from Keanu to Marina, trying to process everything. Marina, still frozen, attempted to recover. I didn't know. I didn't recognize." Keanu raised a hand gently, stopping her mid-sentence. "It's not about being recognized," he said, his voice still even, still kind, but carrying an undeniable weight of truth. "It's about how you treat people when you think they are nobody." That line hung in the air, slicing through the tension. A few customers shifted uncomfortably, the impact of his words settling into the room. The manager cleared his throat, suddenly aware of the gravity of the situation. "Let me personally handle the transaction, and of course, we'll offer you anything else you might like to see," the manager said, trying to regain control of the situation. Keanu glanced at him thoughtfully. "You know," he said, lowering the box onto the counter, "I didn't come in here to test anyone. I just wanted a gift." He tapped the ribbon once, a quiet finality in his gesture. "But I got something else instead." The room was completely still. Everyone waited. Keanu let the word hang in the air, looking at Marina again, not with cruelty, but with something far more unsettling, quiet disappointment. Marina finally found her voice. "Mr. Reeves, I truly didn't mean to." "You don't need to explain," he interrupted, his tone calm yet firm. "You already did, every time you spoke to me." The manager, now visibly sweating, looked ready to melt into floor. He glanced nervously at Marina, then at Julia. This doesn't reflect our standards," he said, his voice shaky. Keanu gave a small smile, the kind reserved for someone accustomed to hearing that phrase. "I'm sure." Another silence settled over the store, this time not born of shock, but of shame. Marina stood still, her hands trembling, her face flushed with heat. It wasn't just that she had misjudged someone, it was that she had done it so confidently, in front of everyone. And now, everyone could see it. One of the younger clients near the back whispered to his friend, "That's John Wick." Someone else muttered, and she tried to tell him he couldn't afford a watch. The humiliation wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It was quiet, deep, public, and complete. Just then, the door opened again. Another man walked in, sharp suit, sunglasses, phone in hand. He looked around and locked eyes with Keanu. "There you are," the man said, smiling. "I've been trying to find you all afternoon. We still on for tonight?" Keanu nodded, and the man approached, shaking his hand. "Sorry, who are you?" the manager asked carefully. "Oh, I'm the director of Arcadia Asterisk," the man replied. "We're in town scouting. Mr. Reeves is meeting the producers later." The manager turned pale, realizing this was yet another high-profile connection. The story kept growing. The director turned to Keanu and joked, "Man, you're always undercover. First time we met, you showed up on set with a sandwich and a busted skateboard." Keanu smiled. Marina, at that moment, could barely breathe. She had been cruel, dismissive, and sarcastic to someone who wasn't just important, but someone who had never once acted like he was. The director looked at the box on the counter. "That for a fan?" Keanu nodded. "A special one." The director's face softened. "You're too good, man." Keanu turned back to the counter, and for a moment, everyone thought he would leave. But then, he looked at Marina one last time, not to shame her, not to gloat, but to offer her the same thing he had given the boy in his trailer that day. Time. Time to reflect. Time to change. The regional manager stepped into the store moments later. After listening to what had happened, she looked Marina in the eyes and said, "You just damaged the reputation of the most respected store in the city, and now you'll have to face the consequences." Keanu's voice was calm as he spoke again. "I came here like this, dressed down, not to test anyone, but to see how people act when they think you're nobody." The air shifted. Marina looked down, ashamed. The way we treat strangers is everything, Keanu added. And what I experienced here today, that wasn't kindness. The regional manager cleared her throat, trying to salvage the moment. Please, allow us to make this right, the manager said quickly. A discount, a gesture. Keanu raised a hand, stopping him. I'm not here for a deal, he said, turning his attention back to Marina. But maybe someone here needs a second chance. To her surprise, he placed the gift box gently back on the counter. You can finish the sale if you want. Marina blinked, speechless. You still want to buy it? Yes, Keanu replied, from someone who's learned something. Hands trembling, Marina processed the sale quietly and handed him the receipt. I'm sorry, she whispered. Keanu gave her a kind look. It's not too late to change. Then, just as quietly as he had arrived, he turned to leave but paused at the door. By the way, he added casually, that motorcycle outside, the old one. Marina looked up, surprised. Prototype, custom build. Worth more than any watch in this store. Keanu gave a half smile. Didn't think that mattered until now. And with that, he walked out, silent, powerful, unforgettable. Inside the store, the silence was deafening. But by the next morning, a video of the encounter had gone viral. Soon, the world would see Keanu Reeves not just as a star, but as a man who, in the most quiet and graceful way, had changed everything. The video spread everywhere. A customer had filmed the entire interaction, Marina's sarcasm, the judgment, and Keanu's quiet, dignified response. It was a moment that would go down in history as a lesson in humility and the power of treating others with respect, no matter their appearance by midday. The video had gone viral. The caption read, she laughed at KeanuReeves for looking too poor to buy a watch. She didn't know who she was talking to. The thousands of comments poured in. This is why you never judge someone by appearance. Class isn't in your clothes. It's in how you treat people. Keanu, always cool. Inside the store, the atmosphere was suffocating. What was once a proud, exclusive showroom now felt like a courtroom. Marina sat in the back office, pale and silent, eyes red from a sleepless night. Her phone was flooded with messages, some angry, others mocking. Some were worse, people calling for her to be fired, cancelled, humiliated. But the real punishment wasn't online. It was in the silence of her co-workers. Julia, once a partner in sarcasm, now avoided eye contact. The manager wouldn't look at her. Clients came in and whispered. Some only came to see the place where it had happened. The regional manager, Vivian, held a team meeting that afternoon. Her tone was sharp, calm, and cold. What happened yesterday wasn't just a PR failure, Vivian began. It was a human failure. Marina's throat closed. We don't train people to idolize celebrities, Vivian continued. We train them to treat everyone with dignity. She paced slowly in front of the staff. You didn't fail because you didn't recognize a famous face. You failed because you saw a man and decided he wasn't worth your full respect. Julia shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Vivian turned to her. That goes for anyone who watched it happen and said nothing. Julia lowered her eyes. Marina swallowed hard. Her voice came out small. I didn't mean to hurt him. I thought he was just. Vivian cut in. A man with a backpack, long hair, motorcycle helmet. Silence filled the room. That man raised the standard of how we treat others, Vivian continued, her voice steady. Without yelling, without revenge, and he did it with more class than most of us showed. The room was still. Vivian looked straight at Marina. You've damaged the reputation of the most respected store in the city, and now you'll face the consequences. Marina's voice cracked. Am I being fired? Vivian paused. You're being held accountable. She handed Marina a folder. Inside, there was a formal reprimand, mandatory training, and a temporary suspension without pay. What you do after this will define who you really are. Marina nodded slowly, shame heavy on her shoulders, as she gathered her things. The world outside the store kept buzzing. News outlets picked up the story. Journalists praised Keanu's calm demeanor. Public figures reposted the video with captions like, the world doesn't need louder voices. It needs better hearts or asterisk, but Keanu himself remained silent. He didn't post. He didn't comment. He had made a statement through action. A few days later, a package arrived at the store, addressed to Marina. No return name, just a small square envelope. She opened it with trembling hands. Inside, there was a note in neat, careful handwriting. Asterisk, everyone has a moment where they choose who they'll be from now on. Luxury isn't about price. It's about presence, the way you show up for others, especially when no one's watching. Asterisk, asterisk, KR asterisk. Attached to the note was a gift card for coffee and a post-it with just 2 words, asterisk start again dot asterisk. The next week, a customer watched Marina gently assist an elderly man trying on a watch. She smiled, patient and kind. On her wrist, a small card was tucked as a reminder, asterisk luxury is how we treat each other dot asterisk. KeanuReeves had walked into a store and been treated like he was less. He walked out without shouting, without revenge, without a scene, but with impact. He reminded everyone watching, in person or online, that kindness doesn't have to be loud to be powerful, and that true luxury isn't gold or diamonds or branding, it's how you make someone feel. Have you ever judged someone too quickly? Or been judged before anyone knew your worth? Maybe it's time we all slow down. Maybe the world needs a little more of the quiet strength of people like Keanu.